Live from the bridge at the Launchpad Studios in Huntington, New York, it's Sports Talk New York with your hosts, Mark Rosenman and AJ Carter. Sports Talk New York is sponsored in part by Cardboard Memories, Clearview, Long Island, the law firm of Decolator, Cohen, and DePrisco, the Phoenix Tube Company, PIMS Incorporated, fueling brand performance for 30 years, Prince Associates for all your insurance needs, and Soho Table Hockey. Here are your hosts, Mark and AJ.
And good Sunday evening to you. Mark Roseman, AJ Carter with you this Sunday evening. We have an amazing show.
And you know, it was a great weekend to go out to watch golf on television, to do apple picking, and to stay away from watching local football and at least local National League baseball.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say that. Because National League, yes. Local National League baseball. The Yankee game was phenomenal yesterday. The Yankees are back in it, and they are playing meaningful games. It's a great race down the stretch. And, you know, if you're a longtime viewer or a listener to the show, you know that we start off each and every week with our Major League Baseball report with John Coppinger. It's sponsored by Cardboard Memories, which is one of Long Island's most reputable memorabilia retail stores for over 29 years. The owner of Cardboard Memories, Scott Stamell, is known for his knowledge and savvy of authentic autographs. He's been featured on HBO Real Sports with Brian Gumbel. Cardboard Memories possesses the honesty and integrity one would want and need from a memorabilia source. Cardboard Memories is located at 6401 Jericho Turnpike, Comac, New York. Visit them at 6401 Jericho Turnpike, Comac, New York, or visit them on the web, cardboardmemories.com. Follow them on Facebook or Instagram. John, before we talk about the Yankees and how they've played down the stretch, let's talk about the Mets. And right now,
do we have to?
It looks like they're going to lose today, which means they're 1 win and 10 losses in their last 11. Since the Yankee series, they've just mailed it in. No emotion, no fight. They've laid down. For me, that's an indictment on their manager. So the question is, how quickly from the day the season ends will we either get a vote of confidence saying that, Luis Rojas will be the manager next year, or, how quickly will he be dismissed?
I think he will be dismissed quickly. That's my guess. Luis Rojas already survived one change of regime. There's no way he can survive a second, because there will be a second when they hire a new baseball president of baseball operations, if and when. My thing with Rojas is, yes, he's made some questionable moves that have cost him some games, but everybody talks about him being the players' manager. This is the guy that's going to get the players to play for him. And all we heard from him in the lead up through basically the 1st of August or the middle of August is how special this group is, how, they're great and we're building something special. It's a great room. And I manage the same as I do. I manage in September the same as I do in April. So what that tells me is that do these players have another gear in them, or are they not good enough to have another gear, or did they have it but were never encouraged to go grab it because everything was great and the same since April? If that's the answer they get from the players, then that is an indictment on Luis Rojas. Yes.
But the problem is he doesn't really manage. The bottom line is he does not manage the same from day to day. I think the number was somewhere in the neighborhood of 100, not counting starting pitchers, but I believe Luis Rojas has used 148 different starting lineups. Now, that's absolutely insane. And he was asked about it the other day, and he says he really doesn't think it weighs on a player's mind where he is in the lineup, which is, and he is a career baseball guy. So either he's protecting the analytics department by making that statement and not throwing them under the bus, or he's not the baseball man we think, because you know what? Players need defined roles. And granted, he had to use a lot of different lineups due to injuries. I get that. But you know what? From the life of me, when you have Baez, who came and, had a little cold streak in the beginning. After his injury, he was hot. To have him batting behind Michael Conforto, who has been ice cold.
4 different places every day.
And who's been ice cold, and having him batting 6th when he's your only legitimate RBI guy that's, done it consistently, was absurd.
John, one of the points I have, though, that concerns me is not just how quickly they get rid of Rojas, but do they have somebody lined up? How quickly they find a new director of baseball operations? Do they need to do it, a week from now, week after the season ends, 2 weeks after the season ends? Because again, managerial candidates are out there, they start getting scooped up. So to me,
Yeah.
they have to move very quickly to get their infrastructure in place to hire a manager and then move from there.
Well, but yes, the quicker the better. And the hope is that the candidates for president of baseball operations that Steve Cohen may or may not be talking to, you hope that they're starting to make some inroads in feeling people out. You would hope that they would also say, okay, well, that they would also give Steve Cohen their designs, their visions for who the manager should be and who they would go after. So I'm sure, and also what kind of strategy do they want? Do they want to tear it down and rebuild, or do they want to build on what they have and build the core and bring guys back like Stroman and Baez? I do think that hopefully the president of baseball operations will be announced quickly, and then the manager will be announced very soon after that.
It is fascinating that, as bad as they are, they're kind of the story in New York, even though the Yankees are the team that's battling for a playoff spot. Quickly, before we let you go, you take a look at the Yankees. Can they hold off Toronto? They have 3 games with them on the road, and then the Jays finish 3 at home versus the Orioles, while the Yankees finish at home versus Tampa Bay. Can they hold off the charge, or maybe Boston is the team that fades out of the top 3?
That's it. The Yankees are not did themselves any favors, or the schedule makers didn't do them any favors the last week where they had the Jays and the Rays. And I think both Boston and Toronto have Baltimore this week. But we've always said the Yankees have not played well against their division rivals. Lately, they have. They're 5-0 against Boston in their last 5. We'll see what happens tonight. They lost the last 4 against Toronto, so yeah, that's a worry. But they did sweep them the last time they were in Toronto, which they will be, and they've done fairly well against the Rays in the last 6. So the Yankees are heating up against the division, and I think that's gonna. If that continues, they'll be in the wild card, and most likely will host the wild card, depending on how the Orioles do. Basically, this past week against the Jays and the Sox.
Awesome, Johnny. We'll speak to you next week. John Carpenter heard here each and every week with the Major League Baseball Report. We're going to take a quick break. On the other side, an absolutely fascinating man. And, if you are a Met fan, I'm sure you've seen the Once Upon a Time in Queens. We'll be back with the director of that, Nick Davis, right after this.
Do you own a business? When is the last time you actually had a visit from or even spoke with your insurance representative? Did your current insurance agency sell to another firm or maybe merge, leaving you without the attention you deserve? Prince Associates is a provider of commercial insurance nationwide and represents some of the finest insurance carriers in the industry. Prince Associates has been representing commercial clients since 1965, and we continue to grow and offer our personal services in a competitive and ever-changing market. If you want back the insurance relationship you deserve, reach out to us, 516-822-6550. That's area code 516-822-6550. And ask for Leith or Craig, or find us on the web at www.princeins.com.
And welcome back to Sports Talk New York. Mark Roseman, AJ Carter with you this Sunday evening. Joining us now is a man who is a triple threat in the entertainment industry, as he's an accomplished writer, director, producer. He got a start in film and television by interning on Ken Burns' 1995 Emmy Award-winning Outstanding Informational Series, Baseball. In addition to his work with Burns, which included jobs on Cornerstone and The West, he worked for filmmaker David Grubin, producing Money and Power, The History of Business for CNBC. He also directed the Emmy Award-winning Jack, the Last Kennedy film in 1993, produced with his brother, Peter Davis. In 1998, he wrote and directed 1999, a black comedy feature film starring Jennifer Garner, Dan Futterman, and Amanda Peet, which aired on the Sundance Channel. The film was screened at over 20 film festivals worldwide. Besides his father, who we already mentioned, his grandfather was Herman J. Mankiewicz, who co-wrote what is considered by many critics, filmmakers, and fans to be the greatest films of all time, Citizen Kane, which is universally praised for its cinematography, music editing, and narrative structure, which have been considered innovative and precedent-setting. His film, Ted Williams, the greatest hitter who ever lived, marked the first baseball subject in the series' 32-year history of PBS's American Masters series. His latest film, Once Upon a Time in Queens, is a 4-part documentary series. It's centered on one of my favorite teams of all time, the 1986 Mets, one of baseball's most dominant and iconic teams. It is a pleasure to welcome back Nick Davis to Sports Talk New York. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
It's always our pleasure because, every time we speak to you, there's not enough time to talk about so many things. So before we get into the film, let's talk a little bit about your career. We mentioned in the open about your dad and grandfather, but in baseball terms, You really are the Griffeys or the Boons of filmmaking. Your grandfather, who passed away before you were born, co-wrote, as we said, one of the greatest films of all time. Your dad, Peter, is an author, novelist, and journalist. His film Hearts and Minds about the American military action in Vietnam won the best feature documentary in 1974. Your brother is a TV writer. Your great uncle was the late Joseph L. Mankiewicz, who set a record by winning a pair of Writing and Directing Academy Awards 2 years in a row. Your cousins include the late screenwriter Thomas Mankiewicz and current film critic Ben Mankiewicz. That's an awful lot of talent from one family. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages within the industry when you come from such a historic, film legacy line?
Well, I don't know. Yes, there are, of course, disadvantages in that how could you ever live up to some of those things? I mean, how could you ever write anything nearly as good as Citizen Kane? Interestingly, Mike, I'm not sure if you know this, but I actually have a book out right now that just came out the exact same day as the documentary series. It's called Competing with Idiots, Herman and Joe Mankiewicz, a dual portrait about Herman and his brother Joe. And I think it gets at the heart of the problems and challenges of having this kind of family, because nothing you do will ever be good enough. Even if you come from loving parents, as I did, there is a sense of like, you just can't compete. And then on the other hand, it opens doors in the industry. And I remember Tom, my cousin who did pass away a few years ago, I remember him telling me, what's great is you can get your foot in the door, but you better produce, because if you don't, you're out faster than maybe another person who they might, give extra time to. But if you're not going to live up to, in his case, his father, Joe, like he'd be, out on his keister.
So, Nick, the stage A card, you actually started working on Competing with Idiots many years ago in 2003. So aside from the advice your editor gave you to take some of you out of the book as a character, how else did the book change over the 18 years? Was it mostly a matter of approach, or do you find additional facts and anecdotes?
It was mostly the approach. And I think just a certain level of like coming to accept that I was actually writing the book. I kind of backed into it. I had pitched it as a documentary about Herman and Joe and their two careers and lives, and also centering on their two greatest movies, Citizen Kane and All About Eve, because it's sort of my contention that All About Eve is unwittingly or not, an unconscious autobiographical, portrait of Joe himself. Joe as the younger, scheming, cold, calculating artist. Eve taking down the more beloved, self-destructive, charismatic, older artist, Margot Channing, with Herman as the sort of Margot Channing figure. Anyway, I pitched that to American Masters. They said, oh, that's interesting. You can start work on it. And here's a teeny bit of money to get you going. And to make a long story short, I then sold it as a companion book. The documentary went away, and I had a companion to a non-existent film. So, and then I just had this albatross for years and years and years. And as you were saying, like, I couldn't find a way in. It was very dry and dusty. And I was writing, but it was boring to me. And then finally I had what I thought was a breakthrough. And it was, in a way, of putting myself into the story and telling not just their life stories, but mine. And, I finished that book and I thought, I've done it. These three great lives, two of them obviously well-known and mine less well-known, but still a life. And I gave it to my editor and she said, great, this is what you had to do to write it. Now take yourself out of it. And when I did that about a year later, because I was really resistant to that suggestion, I read it through one afternoon and thought, oh, I see. I now have a point of view on these two guys' life stories, which the original dry version did not. And so, and then it was a matter of just, digging back into the research and writing it properly. But, in the meantime, I was working on other things and obviously wasn't writing every day, but I did set aside at least 2 considerable chunks of time every week to work on the book. And that's how ultimately it got done.
Interesting. For years, Citizen Kane has been a staple of film studies classes from high school to college to graduate school. How many times had you seen that movie in a classroom setting, and how many of your teachers were unaware that you were Herman Mankiewicz's grandson?
That's interesting. I don't know that I saw it in a class. I saw it. I saw it at home, and I saw it. At theaters and repertory theaters. And I saw Roger Ebert used to do this thing where he would talk you through a class. And I went to him while he did it once, and we didn't get very far. I mean, it was so great. He would just like stop at every frame, and I don't think we got out of the sort of opening newsreel. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, it's funny you did this. And he was like, well, why didn't you tell me beforehand? I was like, oh, because I don't know. No, I never actually studied Citizen Kane or All About Eve for that matter. I just watched them both a lot, especially, once I got out of college, actually.
So another movie, Mank, is a 2020 American biographical drama film about the development of the screenplay for Citizen Kane. Did you see the film, and if so, what did you think of the director David Fincher's use of black and white as an homage to the film itself?
Well, I thought it was beautiful. I mean, it was gorgeous. I did see the film. I saw it actually 3 times with captions on every time. There's a lot stuffed into that film that if you're not the grandson of the man, I don't know how you can possibly follow what's going on. It took me 3 times to really understand like everything that was going on in that movie. There's so much jammed into it. It's gorgeous. I mean, it's an absolutely beautiful and loving homage to Citizen Kane and those kinds of films of the late 30s and early 40s. I thought it was just stunning looking.
So talking a little about you and your career, you actually got your start right out of college doing improv comedy. As you settled on a career in reality-based films, how did that experience help you deal with surprises that can come from filming interviews?
Oh, well, that's a great question. It's funny. The first thing I go to is in Once Upon a Time in Queens, Keith Hernandez's cat. We filmed Keith outdoors initially, and there's 2 interviews in the film. And he's outdoors wearing a yellow shirt for some of it. And then it was on the waterway in Florida, and it was just too loud. There was somebody mowing his lawn, and there were boats, and we were like, all right, we're coming inside. He changed his shirt, gave it a different look, and the cat was there. Haji was there. And, people on the set were like, well, where can we put the cat? Can we put the cat in a little, in a separate room and close the door? But the cat was happy walking around and jumping up on, and I just said, no, the cat's fine. And I think that had I not had background in improv and knowing that accidents are what make things great and special, then we wouldn't have had Haji in the film. And I'm incredibly happy that we do. Because he becomes like a sort of running character.
It's creepy.
At times it is creepy. It's like Keith's emotional support animal while he's talking about his issues with his dad. Right. But all right, let's move on to Once Upon a Time in Queens. You look at the success that the Last Dance documentary on Michael Jordan and Bulls had, or the current Ken Burns Ali series. Both of those subjects. Because the Bulls with Jordan, it's national. It's not just Chicago centric. The Mets, and given the point that was 1986, there's that built-in New York Met fanatical fan base. But as a filmmaker, do you have to tailor that a little bit to have a wider national appeal?
No, at least not consciously. I was just interested in telling the story, and I knew that from my point of view, I was like, well, this is a great story. Why has it never been told in long form documentary? I think that I was really focused on telling the story as best I could. And if that leads to a national audience liking it, great. If it's only Met fans who like it, that's too bad. I really want this film to be able to play to people who didn't like the Mets, don't like the Mets, don't know baseball. We had a couple of screenings, public screenings outdoor in New York before it aired. And, my favorite thing was a friend of a friend who is a woman from Ireland who doesn't even like baseball, just tagged along because her husband was out of town and she had nothing to do that night. She tagged along with a friend of mine and had said to him, I'm not going to stay for both hours. They played the first 2 episodes. And not only did she stay, but she came up afterwards and was just like agog because the characters are so good. And it's the characters and in a movie that make it worthwhile. And so even if you don't know, a double from a double play, wow, this Darryl Strawberry guy, he's really interesting. And Lenny Dykstra's fascinating, and Mookie and all of them. So to me, I didn't think about, well, what can I do to make this appeal to a national audience? It was always about what is the best way to tell this story of that particular team and time and place. because to me, no sports team has ever captured its time and place the way the 1986 Mets did.
So Jimmy Kimmel's Kimmelot is one of the producers of this project. It's their first foray into the documentary space. What was their role in the project, and did Jimmy himself have any, creative input?
Yes, he definitely had creative input. Their role was great. When we first hooked up, we were just about ready to take the film to market when, through a crazy set of circumstances, we were thrown together, and it was like, hey, do you want Jimmy Kimmel, who is a huge fan of the Mets and a huge fan of the 86 Mets in particular, do you want him and cousin Sal to be part of this? And I was like, well, let's have the meeting. And we had the meeting, and it became clear, like, not only is he going to help sell this in the room to buyers, whether it's whoever we go to, but he's going to help promote it. And he's super smart and successful in the entertainment world and is going to give fabulous, interesting notes. And he did. He watched every cut. He also helped us get access to celebrities. I'm not saying we would have not been able to get some of these people, but when you have Jimmy Kimmel on your team and you're calling John McEnroe or George R.R. Martin or Oliver Stone or any of the sort of celebs who were meaningful in New York City in the mid-'80s, and you want them in the film, Jimmy's name can only help. So he was enormously helpful. And he had one really great note when he saw the first rough cut, which was just, we sort of put that up in the editing room board. It was like, more New York, more New Yorkers, more 1986. And that may sound really obvious, especially now that the film is done. But, when you're really trying to tell the story initially and you don't have a narrator and you're trying to weave it all together, I think we did possibly in those early cuts lose sight of the fact that, like, what made this special was the New Yorkiness of it all. And hammering that home and making sure the music of the times really popped to the front. That was Jimmy's big note when he saw the first cut. And he had all kinds of little cuts too, like get out of this scene earlier, whatever it is. He was terrific to work with, really fun.
To that more New Yorkier and more of the time, I thought the use of the film The Warriors as an early thread in the film was very interesting. The film's release date, interestingly enough, 1979, falls pretty much right smack in the middle of the Mets' 1973 World Series appearance and the 1986, plus one of the film's main characters was named Cleon, so nicely done there. What was it about the film The Warriors that made it important enough to use within the framework of the early portion of the film?
Well, there were a couple of things. As we talked to people about their vision of New York in the 70s, two guys on the team brought it up, independent of each other. Ed Lynch and Dwight Gooden both said that their vision of New York City was this scary movie, The Warriors, where guys in Yankee uniforms were going to beat you up. And the fact that the Mets were terrible at that point and the Yankees were the dominant team in baseball, it seemed like, well, that's natural in the early part of this film when we're talking about the late 70s and how scary the city was and how the Mets are, this sort of terrified underdog. That felt really right. And then by the time the mid-'80s roll around and it's the summer of 86 and the Mets have become the dominant team in town and it's the Mets who are beating everybody up and pounding everybody, then it was sort of like this wonderful sort of I became what I beheld, that line from the Untouchables, where the Mets have become the dominant team and the Mets are beating the crap out of everybody. So it felt fun for us in the film to reprise the Warriors and sort of suggest, yeah, it used to be that they were scared of these guys and now they have become those guys.
You alluded this before with Keith. So I felt one of the subtle nuances in the film was a lot of the interviews were shot outdoors, whether it be Wally Backman on his yearly camping trip, Darryl outdoors, Lenny obviously poolside at someone else's house, definitely not his.
Jail, which is also possible.
Ray Knight, Kevin Mitchell, Calvin Schiraldi at the ballpark, while others such as Keith were one shot in, one out. Doc inside, Darling inside, O'Heater, and Davey Johnson are inside. The outdoor look was different than what you're accustomed to in documentaries. And I really felt that it worked really nicely. So was that intended or was that more of a function because of COVID? And what effect did COVID have on the actual budget?
Well, those are great questions. Yeah, I was very happy with the outdoor look, but it was purely COVID. Well, I shouldn't say that. I always like shooting outdoors if possible, but it can be too loud, and that's what happened with Keith, which was before COVID. Most of the indoor interviews, with a couple of exceptions, were shot pre-COVID. Ron Darling was post-COVID. There were a few others we were able to squeeze inside, but it was, for the most part, once COVID hit, it was very challenging. It's hard to complain. I mean, we were allowed to continue to work on something we all cared passionately about, something that I obviously have been dreaming about for years. So I felt enormously lucky that I got to work on this every day, despite the little production hiccups. The real problem in terms of the budget was that typically in a documentary, you'll say, okay, we're going to do 2 interviews today, and we'll have these 2 people come to us here, or we will go here and then we'll break down and drive somewhere else and go do it. It meant we couldn't do that. We could only have 1 interview a day. So we'd originally planned on getting about 60 interviews in the can, and we ended up with only 44. Not that 44 isn't enough to tell the story. It turned out 44 is plenty enough to tell the story. But there were a few other interviews I think we would have done had we not been, had COVID not struck. On the other hand, there were real advantages because of COVID. Lots of those interviews were filmed remotely. You mentioned Lenny Dykstra. Yes, we had a rental house in Los Angeles. He went to that. I was in my office in New York City, zooming in. So they place a laptop with my image on it right next to the camera, and it looks like he's talking. Well, he is. He's talking just off camera to an interviewer, but he's actually talking to me 3,000 miles away. And I think it helped focus some of the interviews more than might have ordinarily been the case, especially if we'd been filming outdoors. So I think it was, it helped us and it hurt us in different ways, I think.
Given Lenny's history with rental houses,
3,000 miles away.
I hope you did have a good security person to get him out of there quickly. So you just did mention about the 41 and the 60, and I assume that you make that list of all the important people you want. So how do people like Cyndi Lauper and John McEnroe make it in? And were there players like maybe Jesse Orosco, Hojo, Danny Heap from the Mets, or Mike Scott, Charlie Kerfield, Billy Hatcher from the Astros, Clemens, Stapleton, Bob Stanley, or Hurst from the Red Sox? Were they some of those interviewed, or were just, or some of them, we know that Forster declined to be interviewed, but were some of them just not available, or did it just become that you had so much material already that you felt it was enough?
Yeah, it was a little of both. I mean, some of those people turned us down. Mike Scott turned us down. Jesse Orosco turned us down, wow. Unfortunately. I think had it not been for COVID, I would have reapproached Jesse Orosco, but he turned us down so early that by the time we sort of circled back around, I felt like I don't have time to chase Jesse Orosco. He would have been great, but we've got the story working well without him. I think he felt, and I think some of the other Mets did too, oh no, not this again, and this is going to be so negative, and it's all, the drugs and the drinking. And yes, that's part of the story, but we wanted to tell the complete story. I really did view this all along as a big epic story of a team and a time and a place, and how it had emerged from the malaise of the late 70s into the sort of the heyday of the go-go 80s, and how the city seemed to be doing so much better and the team was doing so much better. And those two things were kind of in lockstep. So some of the players you mentioned did turn us down. And then some of them we didn't have time to get. I feel like there was somebody else, maybe on the Red Sox side, that turned us down. I can't remember, but the first cut of this, of all 4 episodes, totaled 6 hours and 25 minutes. Wow. We did a lot. Yeah, we did a lot more with the Red Sox in that version. And at that point, the other thing that was complicated about, not to go too much into the weeds on the production of this, but typically you shoot just about all your interviews before you edit. And because of COVID, we weren't able to do that. So we had started the edit well before we completed the interviews. So we woke up one day and had a 6.5 hour rough cut and had to get down to 3 hours and 20 minutes and hadn't completed all our interviews. But at that point, we knew, all right, there's no way we're going to be able to do all of this. We're not looking for more Red Sox at this point. We still haven't talked to Ron Darling or Roger McDowell. And so that was, as the whole thing shaped itself, it sort of told us where we had to spend more time and attention.
There's always Disney Plus for the 6-hour version for sure. Right. But it's also interesting. And this resonates a little more with me now that you mentioned, the Kimmel, more New York. Of all the people that covered the Mets in the day, the one that makes it in the film is Nhl Report, who tells an absolutely awesome story about George Foster. So awesome that I actually doubted it. And I, went through my newspapers.com and we're able to find one article that makes mention of the fact that Foster was there. He mentioned not to go anywhere. This game's not over. But why Ann over a guy like Howie Rose or Sal Marciano, Marv Albert, Len Berman, who are clearly much more synonymous with New York and the Mets than Ann is?
Well, those are all the great questions, and there's no good answer. It's not like, all those guys were on long lists, and Howie was on, even shorter lists. The real thing I wanted to do is keep the focus on 1986 in New York City. And Howie Rose, as great as he is, and I yield to no one in my love of Howie Rose, I don't think he's associated with 1986 New York Mets. I associate him with other teams, and I felt he was going to bring a kind of, for lack of a better word, just instant baggage that I worried was going to tilt the thing in the wrong way. I was not here to be the official historian of the New York Mets telling the 1986 Mets story. I was here as a filmmaker, an outsider telling that story. And I just had that concern about Howie. Not that we wouldn't have gone to him if I didn't also have people like Jeff Pearlman and Greg Prince and Eric Sherman who have written about this team telling me the history. Once I had the history down pat of everything that happened, I was a lot less worried about, well, let me go get a beat writer or Howie Rose to fill in the history. Because at that point it was, well, now we have to make sure we're telling the New York story. Now we have to make sure we're getting the players in and telling this incredibly exciting and dynamic time in New York City. And that's where, and look, reasonable people can disagree and say, well, that was a dumb choice. What are you doing spending money on Cyndi Lauper when you could have spent money on Howie Rose? But actually, there was and no one has asked about this, which is fine, but you kind of did. There was a different style chosen for the sort of quote unquote celebrities. It was handheld. They were really inexpensive interviews. It was a one-man crew and me zooming in. It wasn't a sit down where you're spending a good deal of money and doing a whole thing, which we would probably have had to do with somebody who knew the whole history the way any of the beat guys did. So anyway, that's how we arrived at it.
That gets to one thing I want to ask you about. This is interesting to me with some of the other people in the documentary. So I get Jeff Pearlman, Eric Sherman, Roger Angell, but there are other people who are not baseball people, not notably identified city people. They talk about commentary. They put, the team and the city in its place in history. So how did you select these, what I would call general societal commentators? How important role do they feel in making this a special documentary?
Well, to me, it felt like you can't tell the story of this team without telling the story of the city. So who can we get to speak about New York City in the 80s? It didn't matter to me if they're not a baseball fan. Let me talk to Kurt Anderson. Kurt Anderson made Spy magazine in the summer of 86. That was like so important culturally speaking, Spy magazine. And he was there, he arrived in the late 70s and saw what happened to the city. So I wanted to talk to him. And when I talked to him first and said, he said, I don't know anything about baseball. I said, that's fine. I want you to talk about the city. And if we don't use it, we don't use it. Everything he said about 1980s New York City, he thought he was talking about the city, and I heard it. He's talking about the Mets too. The swagger, the bravado that the city had, the drugs, the nightclubs, all of the stuff he talked about was about the 86 Mets, even though he didn't know it. So that was kind of reinforced what we had thought going in, that like, God, this team in this city, they were one. Perlman said they blended into each other. And, so that's why and John Strasbaugh, fascinating New York historian, who in a crazy coincidence turned out to be Darryl Strawberry's ghostwriter for his autobiography. So here's a guy who can talk chapter and verse about New York City, who also knows Darryl Strawberry and knows Darryl's, childhood traumas as well as anybody. So that was what we wanted to do, every step of the way, was tie the team, not in a forced way. It was true. The city and the team were one.
So I'm sure every Met fan who watches it comes away with different opinions as to how the players came across and what stories they told resonated with them. For me, because we have a personal connection with a bunch of the players, every time Nels was on, you had to pay attention and you knew he was going to be interesting because it's just Lenny. I thought Wally Backman and Davey Johnson were so down to earth and spot on with everything they said. Keith was so open about his dad, on top of it with the family film. And like I said before, Haji played his emotional support animal. His story about Clemens shaving was the first time I ever heard that, which was interesting. Kevin Mitchell was also so animated. Doc's story was heartbreaking and riveting. Is there one story, one player to you that just blew you away?
No, all of the ones you mentioned and Darryl. I think that I was, Met fans of that time. Like you had your guy. My guy was Darryl in the 80s. And so I actually, even though it was the height of the pandemic, I did fly to St. Louis. I said, that's the one we're actually doing. I didn't come all this way to talk to Darryl Strawberry through a laptop. And so I spent the whole day with him in St. Louis. Again, he changed his shirt midway through, so it may look like two different interviews. And I just felt like this guy has really changed. I mean, he has perspective on his life story that very few people, forget ball players, very few people can talk about their own childhood and their early 20s and all the sort of lost and horrible, abusive behavior that he engaged in. He talks about with such wisdom and clarity that it was just, I was really awestruck by that day. But I mean, everybody you named, I thought did a terrific job. And, as a filmmaker, I was thrilled. As a Met fan, I had all kinds of different reactions. Like, why did we never hire Wally Backman to manage this team?
We ask that every day.
So the latter part of the documentary chronicles how Frank Cashin almost immediately started dismantling the team that he had built. How different a film do you think this would have been had, say, the Mets come back to win in 1988 when the pitcher they couldn't beat was Earl Hershiser instead of Mike Scott? Would that have made the project different and the film different?
Oh, totally. Yes. I think had they won more than one, it's a very different kind of story. It doesn't have the tinge of heartbreak and what if and the sort of disappointment that has been baked into the franchise for the last 35 years. I think that, and this sort of, Halley's Comet comes along wrong once in a generation. It came along in 86, and will it ever come again? That thing, which is so, as a storyteller, filmmaker, that's so great. As a Met fan, it's a misery. And yet I did come to a better appreciation of what they actually had accomplished by the end of it. I did feel like, they gave us 3 amazing, memorable years, and the rest were memorable too. I mean, 87, 88, 89, 89 was a nightmare, but 90, they were a great team for quite a while. And they did their best. So, but yeah, it's a very different film it's a very different film if he brings in Randy Myers. I mean, it's like.
So I also know from doing my KINER'S Corner book that footage is very difficult to come by. The footage you have in this documentary is amazing, ranging from the scene in the Red Sox locker room as they scurry out before the Red Sox come in after the Mets come back, to Mookie coming into the clubhouse in the tunnel, and all the great Keith Hernandez home movies. How tedious was it to try and keep track of all the footage that you came across?
Well, luckily, it would have been very tedious if it had all been up to me. But I had a tremendous team of researchers and producers on my side. And also we had a partnership with Major League Baseball, and they were enormously helpful in feeding us everything that they had. And then sometimes it was just fans sending in home movies of like Game 3 of the NLCS, or the clinching night against the Cubs. We got great home movies from that night. and then sometimes it's just like on YouTube, like, well, why can't someone please find me Ralph Kiner pronouncing Mitsubishi, and so that we got right. I know you have it. But that came from YouTube late in the day, where we finally found the holy grail of Ralph saying Mitsubishi. So it was just a massive effort, but thankfully, the film industry has developed in such a way so that there are ways to organize things and spreadsheets and everything, so that we managed to keep everything organized, so that when the editors needed something, they were able to get it.
And there's a companion book coming out. When is that coming out?
That's coming out actually October 5th. And that includes a lot of the stories that we just didn't have time for. It's done in the style of an oral history. So it is all these interviews put together and people telling their stories. And so it goes into more depth about a lot of the things that we cover in the documentary. And then just lots of great stories that we just, didn't have time for, especially in the aftermath, but actually all the way through. Great stories from Ray Knight that, the one I'm most kicking myself over not being in the film is a terrific story Ray Knight told about stopping Darryl and Gary Carter from fighting on a team bus in St. Louis in '86. It's like, we're not going to fight each other, which was just great. And I think that spoke to what I think people missed, especially in management, about Ray Knight's importance to that team as a unifying glue in the clubhouse. So yeah, and the book is really fun. I actually just saw the book for the first time last week. It's gorgeous. It's got great pictures, and obviously I'm proud of all of the work, but like seeing like the book people really step up and produce such a nice looking book. It's really cool.
Kudos on the release date too, October 5th, because every Met fan is going to have plenty of time during the playoffs to read the book.
I know, the whole time we were working on it, especially the first couple of months of the year, I was like, this is going to be great. What kismet,
Yeah. What's your next project?
It's really too early to talk about, but I will definitely come back and talk about it when it is, until contracts are signed. I just hate to talk about it.
Gotcha. Lastly, are your daughters interested in continuing the family business at all?
Well, possibly. My older daughter in particular, she loves storytelling and has had not lots of internships and stuff in the film and TV business. She's in college, but I think she could be headed that way. My younger daughter, it's too early to tell.
Nice. Nick, thanks for coming back with us. We always love seeing your work, talking about it with you. More importantly, thanks for helping me relive so many of those great memories of that season that ended with me and my late dad sitting in our season ticket section 114 box E, seats 3 and 4, watching the Mets win the World Series.
Oh, wow. Good for you. Both game 6 and 7?
6 and 7, and there's a great story. I'll tell you that off the air. And had you called me, it would have fit perfectly. It was the reason why we were at I've been to mostly every single postseason game in New York with my dad, forever.
That's great.
Yeah, so we really appreciate it. And I'll speak to you. I'll tell you the story.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, guys.
Our pleasure. Nick Davis, the director of the great new 4-part series, Once Upon a Time in Queens, and a companion book coming out just in time to coincide with the end of the Mets season. Back to talk Rangers Islanders with Russ Cohn and the NHL Report right after this.
The Phoenix Tube Company Incorporated is among the country's leading manufacturers of structural ornamental stainless steel tubing, rectangles, squares, and processed flat bars. The company takes pride in its everyday commitment to quality and customer service. The philosophy of the company has been and continues to be to support the growth of the stainless tube market through distribution and service centers throughout the country. Ornamental and structural stainless steel tubing is used for a wide variety of aesthetic and mechanical products where superior finish and corrosion resistance are required. Some products manufactured include tubing for mirror bracket arms, boat rails and ladders, washroom grab bars, swimming pool rail products, medical equipment, automotive step bars and trimming, as well as structural framing for food processing equipment. For a quote or for more information on how the Phoenix Tube Company can meet your ornamental and structural stainless steel tubing needs, visit them on the web at phoenixtube.com or call them toll-free at 1-800-526-2124.
Joe Jackson can only mean one thing. Either you're tuned into the wrong radio station or it's time for AJ's Sunday Papers Weird Story of the Week. What do you got, AJ?
So, we talk in New York about owners. We talk about Steve Cohen and the Mets. We talk, about, Dolan and the Rangers and the Knicks. Well, here is an owner who's a little bit different in the country of Suriname, which is in South America. Not only does he own a soccer team, not only did he build the stadium for it and name it after himself, he's the vice president of the country. He also is a larger-than-life figure who is said to have fathered 50 children. And by the way, he's wanted by Interpol for drug trafficking charges. He's been called the Robin Hood of Suriname because he once held up a bank and gave the government's money to the people. Well, his name is
Suriname Forest instead of Sherwood Forest?
His name is Ronnie Brunswick. He's 60 years old. And by the way, last week, he got to use the privileges of ownership. He actually inserted himself in the lineup as a player in a game, and he played, but don't expect him to be playing too much more, at least for the next 3 years, because now he's been suspended by CONCACAF, the league his team plays in, because after the game, he was caught on a viral video of going to the opposing locker room and giving payments to the opposing players.
Didn't that happen with Ted Turner with the Braves? Wasn't he the man when he owned TBS? Didn't he
manage
them for a game?
They wouldn't let him.
They wouldn't let him.
Baseball wouldn't let him. They stepped in. He wouldn't do anything like that. And not since Connie Mack. Connie Mack didn't even play for the team that he owned. But this is privileges of ownership. And Ronnie Brunswick.
I don't understand when he was in the other locker room paying them.
It's not been adequately explained, as they would
say. He paid them off so he.
And by the way, the other team won 6-0.
Oh, so he didn't even score a goal.
Right.
I figured
maybe they paid him for not injuring him.
Maybe. That's bizarre. That's a great story, though. All right, it's time now for the Nhl Report with Russ Cohen, sponsored by our friends over at Soho Table Hockey. What's table hockey, you say?
What's table hockey?
Some of us might have grown up with rod hockey, bubble hockey, or even air hockey tables. Soho Table Hockey has embraced the nostalgia of those old tabletop games, designed a whole new board for the future, handcrafted with designer wood, state-of-the-art playing surface, unbendable rods, energy-absorbing walls. This is a game table players can age 8 to 80 can enjoy. Even better, the exceptional quality and design allows the game to stand up the intensity of tournaments, which is why Soho Table Hockey is the #1 choice of championship players throughout North America. Visit Soho Table Hockey to learn more and start your order on a custom game. You can choose your wood, a centerized logo, and even the team matchups. Go ahead, drop the puck. You'll love Soho Table Hockey so much you won't be able to stop playing. I don't know if you want to run out and design your teams yet, because right now the exhibition season is underway and lots of teams are going to start paring down their rosters. The Rangers already dropped 13 players off their roster today. The Islanders play the Rangers today. You look at the Islanders, there are 4 players that are kind of bubble guys, and I don't know where they fit in the Islanders' plans. 3 players, actually. So Kiefer Bellows, Michael Del Cole, and Leo Komarov. Where do you see those guys? Are they just kind of taxi squad guys that hang around and obviously during the season injuries happen and they make their way in the lineup? Bellows doesn't have options yet. He'd have to clear waivers. I don't know what Komarov situation is.
But Komarov had a good playoff run last year.
But right now, Russ, where do you see those guys starting the season?
Yeah, I think they are going to have to keep Bellows up or trade him at the last minute. There is no taxi squad, so that's the situation with that. I don't think Del Cole has a chance to make the team. I think he will get sent down. And Komarov is an interesting one because it wouldn't surprise me if he gets an early season injury or something, so they don't have to send him down because
a convenient early season injury.
Well, I mean, listen, you could go through camp and have a little something come up and have it be enough, especially with the road trip that they're going to have. I just have a feeling that's what's going to happen with Komarov because I know they tried to trade him. Nobody really was interested.
Interesting. And he was very effective for them. So I agree with you. That, it's going to be one of those upper body injuries. He's day to day. All right. So the other thing is, Ryan Reeves had this presser the other day that, here to change the culture, here to make sure other teams are kept held accountable. Here's a guy who had 3 fights last year. This is not, we're not talking about the league as the Broad Street Bullies. Is that kind of the wrong message to send? In fact, even the Rangers Twitter went so far as, showing a clip the other day of Ryan Reeves showing, I believe it was Panarin, how to fight. Oh, it was Kravtsov, right? How to fight and how to hold like the chest protectors. I don't get that.
it was ridiculous. To me, it was like, why don't we just send it back to the 70s? He's going to score, 6 to 7 points this year. He's going to be scratched on a lot of nights. He's not going to play a lot in the third period. I don't know what this is all about. If you want to have him for Tom Wilson, great, but he's going to essentially take up a roster spot for a lot of other things. I get that he's a worldly guy, but Kravtsov needs to actually be able to score at the NHL level. Fighting is not going to be anything you're going to want him to do. So I didn't get any of that. It made no sense to me.
Even to be wasting 30 seconds for a team that has a brand new coach that needs to get systems in place. Number one, first day they scrimmaged instead of even, teaching, his system, which I found was odd as well. And you know what? The bottom line is Julien Gauthier is a big player. Julien Gauthier, could have possibly fit that. Ryan Reeves.
Absolutely.
Ryan Reeves wasn't that type of player when he broke into the NHL. Okay, he needed to find, because he wasn't going to be a scorer. He wasn't really a clutterbuck or that type of player. He was he became an enforcer. Gauthier could be, they went out and got, Blaze. Gauthier could be that guy. So, I don't see him even making the team based on the way they're making these potential lines already.
No, I don't think he is going to make the team. And Gauthier is strong as hell, and he does have some ability to score, but you'd have to actually give him ice time. Right. He was willing to go to the net. I mean, again, Reeves is going to get 8 minutes a game. If this is a great pickup, this is a Schlatt's move. We all know that. Yep.
All right. Well, the exhibition season in the locals are underway, and 7 o'clock tonight, Islanders Rangers. We'll talk more next week as we'll have games to talk about.
We will.
You got it. Russ Cohen heard here in each and every week with the Soho Table Hockey Report. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to round it out. If you're a New York football fan, you might want to turn us off for the next 8-9 minutes.
Well, Jay's not going to have it easier because Tampa Bay is losing to Los
And you might want to tune back in at 7 o'clock when BT Talks Baseball, talks more about Once Upon a Time in Queens. So keep it tuned right here, or take a quick 9-minute break and while we talk New York football. We'll be back right after this.
Decolator Cohen & DePrisco, LLP, is pleased to introduce their website, policeofficersrighttosue.com, as an educational and informative site designed to instruct members of the law enforcement community of their civil rights in line-of-duty accidents. Many law enforcement members are not aware of their rights to sue and fail to bring lawsuits within a specific time frame, thereby forfeiting their ability to seek rightful compensation against those parties that cause officers to be injured. PoliceofficersRightToSue.com provides successful past results of line-of-duty lawsuits. These examples range from officers being provided with inadequate equipment, RMP accidents, slip and falls, and station house mishaps. If any law enforcement member has a question regarding a potential lawsuit, they can contact DCD at policeofficersrighttosue.com or at 1-800-901-1LAW. That's policeofficersrighttosue.com or 1-800-901-1LAW.
And welcome back to the home stretch of Sports Talk New York on the 365sportscast.com network. Mark Roseman, AJ Carter with you this Sunday evening. It's time now for the NFL Report with Jay Retcher. Football season is here. You know what that means? It means it's time to get your windows and doors ready to let that crisp fall air in and all those disgusting fall bugs out with the Clearview retractable screen. The Clearview retractable screen system comes standard with a lifetime warranty and the patented speed reducer so it won't snap back. You get the luxury of a screen door and a sleek low-profile design without the hassle of a bulky storm door or sliding screen door. Call 631-440-1100 for a free estimate. That's 631-440-1100. Visit them on the web at clearviewlongisland.com. I don't know what we're going to do with this read come winter. We have to
change a little bit, protect yourself from winter or something. Or, with global warming, you can put your screen up now. A lot of things we can.
All right. So Jay, first of all, let's start with the early game here in New York. The New York Giants, 6 points to start the game, winning 6-0. The bottom line is they weren't losing the game until they actually lost the game to the very end, which is more typical of the Jets of the last couple of years than the Giants. But I think you watch the demeanor of Judge on the sideline, and first of all, his clock management, and use of timeouts and challenges were just brutal today because he really left himself, no margin for error, no room to even challenge. At the end of the game, if there was a play during that drive, that got them down the field that needed to be challenged, he had no more timeouts left. he was done. But more importantly, you take a look at this Giant team. When and where did the wheels of this franchise fall off? Because this is not a Wellington Mara type Giant team for the last 3 years, 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, we might have to start doubling up on the hockey conversation after watching these two teams.
No, 1,000 times no.
I tell you what it is like I was thinking about that too. Is like, anytime in sports when you are a coach or a player that hangs his hat on a certain thing, if you're down here in Tampa, we had Lovie Smith as a head coach, big defensive guy, but they couldn't stop a nosebleed. And then, of course, boom, he was gone before you knew it. So if you're a type of guy like Dave Gettleman that says, oh, we got to build the trenches, we got to get these hog mollies, and still to this day, you can't have a consistent offensive line, that's on Dave Gettleman. I mean, this is such a multiple tiered problem. Joe Judge, a disciplinarian, 8 penalties today for 53 yards. Not good enough. You look at a guy as well. I mean, you're watching this game go, and you look at Jason Garrett, and that last play of the first quarter was a stretch handoff to the fullback. You got to be kidding me, man. This guy's calling a game like it's 1995. And I don't know if he's not a mole from the Dallas Cowboys to make sure that this terrible play from the Giants doesn't keep on going, guys. I feel like I'm watching the Giants. They're just not – I don't even feel like they're in the same millennia as the teams in the NFL. It's crazy.
The good news is that Daniel Jones seems to be showing some progress.
But AJ –
but they don't have –
AJ, real quick, AJ, let me just say because of that, the only thing that the Giants do well on offense is individual greatness. That kind of stuff happens. It's not because they make a great play call. It's because he's able to elude the pocket and use his speed. See the same thing with Saquon Barkley. Like, man, they can't scheme him open. Then they do it like a little screen, and then he does his own thing. So it's that individual greatness that we see in spite of the terrible play calling over and over again.
So one quick thing before we let you go, looking at the Rams and your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, do you see another fantastic finish coming up from Tom Brady?
I think I do. I think it's tough because they just lost another cornerback today in Jamel Dean. I mean, don't be surprised, fellas. One of the big stories next week, the Buccaneers are going to trade or sign a veteran cornerback, whether it's Richard Sherman, trade for Gilmore. Something is going to happen. Keep an eye out for that in the next couple of days.
All right. We'll speak to you next week, and we'll hold you to it. Jay Retcher here
Thanks,
each
guys.
and every week with the Capco NFL Report. On the other side of the commercial break, BT Talks Baseball. Going to continue the conversation on the great documentary Once Upon a Time in Queens from Once Upon a Time in Huntington. So keep it tuned right here to the 365sportscast.com radio network.